We're officially in the year of 2024. Now, if you follow the news closely, that we're still paying attention or much closer attention to the war in Ukraine. Now, you might get tired of listening to the conversation whether Russia is going to win the war or Ukraine continue to need more support financially and also from this militarily perspective around the world. But meanwhile, we need to bring one of the major players in the world into our conversation, which is China. And the nation constitutes 1.4 billion people. Now, some believe that China today played a rather significant, or rather what we say, irreplaceable way when we look at the war in Ukraine. And given the fact that today China, it's rather influential, not only is competing with the US on many levels, but also China can be one of the good players that when we look at the war in Ukraine. But some scholars really want to ask the question, is it time for China to take a bold step, or even we say the bigger steps, when we look at the war today? Well, is China willing to do so? And if so, in what ways? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Dr. Vita Golod. Dr. Golod obtained her PhD in economics. She's a junior research fellow of the Modern Studies Department at the AU Krymskyi Institute of Oriental Studies. She's the chairman of the board of the Ukrainian Association of Sinologists. She co-founded of the Ukrainian Platform for Contemporary China. Well, Dr. Golod, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Golod, I want to get started. Again, initially when I discovered you, because of this amazing article that you wrote, which is entitled, "Is China Sincere About Peace in Ukraine?" Now, before we talk about the ongoing war in Ukraine, how about let's go back to understand a little bit more regarding the relationship between China and Ukraine before the war broke out, because I think it's rather crucial, important to understand the previous relationship before assessing what is happening today. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's important to say that Ukraine has 31-year history of diplomatic relations with PRC. China recognized Ukraine's independence in 1991. Just a year later, of January 4th, 1992, countries established diplomatic relations. Since then, Ukraine and China have signed up 300 major agreements, including joint declaration of establishment and development of strategic partnership in 2011, also the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation between Ukraine and China in 2013. So we have all these top-level agreements to have a strategic partnership. When I analyze the relations between Ukraine and China all way long, I usually divide the history of development into two parts: before 2014 and afterward. Before Maidan, Revolution of Dignity, and afterward. Why so? Simply because Ukraine chose the pro-Western way of development. The way of democracy cost us two revolutions and full-scale war. And we all know how China doesn't really like the color revolutions. That's why it's important to say that the PRC negative points of view on the color revolutions. And we can see from the official statements, the academic publications, Chinese government considers the Ukrainian Maidan as a product of Western intervention. So it needed some time for China to transform its approach to Ukraine. Since then, even we kept our agreements and this strategic partnership. Our relations have been developing mostly in terms of trade. In 2019, the PRC achieved the status of our largest trading partner. Some big Chinese state corporation opened the offices in Kyiv. A year before the invasion, value of our contracts with China, signed by Chinese state enterprises in Ukraine, reached 6.6 billion, mostly in infrastructure construction. Here, I'd like also to add a few words on BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Ukraine was the first country which joined this initiative, but only on the paper. The Ukrainian delegation attended the first BRI forum at Beijing, and head of our delegation, Mr. Kupiv, delivered a speech about on the readiness and to participate in the joint projects on infrastructure, energy, high technologies. But the Crimea annexation and occupation of Donbass became the biggest obstacle of the development of BRI in Ukraine. Some experts even say that China would act more intensively as a mediator of the war in Ukraine if it has more investments and businesses in Ukraine. So China has to make, so far, China has not made intensive investments in our country. But Chinese companies started to demonstrate great interest to the future reconstruction project. I'm sure that they will deal through European companies, getting guarantees of their investments, but it's too early to say.
Dr. Golod, I want to go back to the article again. As we know, the war continues in Ukraine. And I want to read something that you wrote. I want to get your further explanation. This is what you wrote, and I quote, China is watching and learning from these processes, building its peacemaking image and benefiting from the chaos on the international markets, buying cheap gas and oil and helping Russia's economy with what was lost due to the Western sanctions. Now, we know that, again, you're the expert, that we study China for so long, that China has never been interested in meddling with any international affairs and respect what we called a domestic sovereignty. But right now, at this moment, China is being put on the hot spot. I mean, again, given the fact that I don't want to use the phrase that you have to take sides, but it doesn't look like that China has many options. So going back to what you said, building its peacemaking image and benefiting from the chaos on the international markets. Can you explain a little bit more? How does China continue to maintain this peaceful or peacemaking image and meanwhile continue to benefit and thrive on the international markets?
It's a very interesting question. First of all, need to say that China sees Ukraine as a proxy war with the United States. We all know that. We learned this from academic papers, from statements, and so on. And my articles in foreign policy that you had chance to read, I wrote it at the end of last year to summarize Chinese activity toward Ukraine in last year, in 2023. And if briefly, it was really predictable from the very beginning, China would not take the Ukrainian side. And the Western world refused Chinese official neutrality and also call this neutrality pro-Russian position. But last year, we've seen some efforts China made toward Ukraine. But we've seen China made more efforts toward Russia. That's why, according to Ukrainian opinion poll, more and more Ukrainians consider China a hostile country. It's very simplistic, I know. Even I made like 100 media contribution just explaining that world is not just black and white, and China has millions reasons just to figure out how to be in this geopolitical situation, complicated geopolitical situation. But when people are dying every day, we need the solution, but not beautiful words. And from Ukrainian official side, we can see totally different position. President Zelenskyy and our diplomats welcome China to the peace talks. Why? Ukraine is trying to keep the balance. It's the simplest answer. And avoid worst case scenario. Even when I was asked why Zelenskyy doing that, I always say because we don't need a new enemy. When you are vulnerable, you need all kinds of support, especially from the great powers. And I've been tracking the Chinese news and rhetoric from the very, very beginning. There was some evolution from the simple concern at the beginning, at the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, to some actions. And last year, Xi Jinping made some efforts towards Ukraine, speaking with Zelenskyy on 26th of April, I still remember that day, and appointing the envoy Lihui to Kiev, Moscow, Europe in May. Ukraine finally appointed the ambassador to Beijing. So it's also a big step from Ukrainian side to have a good dialogue in Beijing. Lihui attended the second Ukrainian peace summit in Jeddah, but refused to come to Malta. And nobody from Chinese side attended the peace talks in Davos, even there were invited. Chinese officials and scholars still call the war in Ukraine a crisis or conflict. So analyzing the articles from Chinese side, we can see from Chinese perspective, this crisis in Ukraine is forcing the countries to choose the sides, as you said, in international system. This conflict is strengthening Japan-US alliance, increasing the risk of Russo-American nuclear war, intensified conflict between Russia and the West, but they do not call Russia the aggressor, the main cause of this war. The Chinese scholars refer to China only when talking about the peacemaking role in the world. So I am not sure that China is ready to play a constructive role. But the very popular question, can Xi Jinping influence Putin to withdraw his troops from our territory? And we don't know. We just can guess. He could probably, but he wouldn't do that now. Why? Because China is watching and learning from this conflict, as I said. And it's also in Chinese politics to not be involved in any military actions in the world. Now China pushed sides to the peace negotiations. That's the only solution China proposed so far. I agree it could be possible, but it was said many times publicly by our officials only after Russian troops left our territory. We all know Chinese-Russian relations are mostly about personal relations between Xi Jinping and Putin. And China sees itself holding this mediating role just for making this beautiful image. And when I asked my Chinese colleagues when China was going to start this role, the common answer was that both sides were ready to the dialogue and wouldn't be able to continue military actions. So from their perspective, we need to stop fighting to win the peace. So it's very devastating, I would say. And another reply, I need to say it was like shock for me. China do not simply would like to play this mediating role in terms of China do not supply Russia any lethal military aid and condemns the use of nuclear weapons. That is Chinese constructive role from a Chinese scholar's perspective. I think it's a very interesting idea for consideration. And the war lasted almost a year and also affected Chinese economy on its relations with EU. And Beijing rather wants to foster any resolution of this war as soon as possible for its own interest, to save its economy and to bring some stability, but not for saving Ukrainian lives. And you ask what would be Chinese behavior in 2024, in this year. I think China will continue to watch and learn from this conflict. And I'm sure China is watching the primaries in the US as well. And also, I'd like to emphasize that Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 opened a Pandora box. And we do not know what would be next. Putin wasn't punished for Crimea annexation, for Georgia, for Moldova, for Syria. So he is sure he won't be punished now. So it's the right moment to defeat Putin's regime. And what is our primary aim? Like every single Ukrainian, every single soldier, just to fight and show the unity of the whole world, with the whole world. That's our primary goal now. Everybody who supports Ukraine, who live in Ukraine and abroad.
Dr. Golod, again, I mean, you mentioned several good points. Of course, it doesn't matter. Well, it should matter where China stands. But now at this moment, the reality, it's very simple. That we've seen people are being treated as victims, and also that citizens are actually suffering in both countries when we look at the war in Ukraine, especially in Ukraine right now. I mean, again, we're looking at those innocent lives. So I want to go back to the article. Again, you just mentioned that from the Ukrainian perspective, that China should play a bigger role as a responsible global leader, but so far, it has no effects. Now, let's talk about something more critical. China's economy is facing the brick wall at this moment. And in addition to that, we've seen that China's was also facing this population decline, and also we're seeing this deterioration of the management from the administration, etc. But don't you think will be a good card to play for China if China willing to take a step up? I mean, again, you mentioned before, Putin is not going anywhere. And also, even though he declares that he's not going to show up for this presidential debate, but again, there are still challengers, there are still candidates, and are willing to challenge this incumbent. So putting everything together, what are the reasons for China from withholding the position or from withholding to stepping forward? Don't you think that if China decides to step up, it's going to even make a better image, or, granted, it's going to make a ripple effects for the whole world? What do you say to that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. From the Ukrainian perspective, China should play a bigger role, as you said, as a responsible global player, leader. We know from all Chinese official public speeches that China respects our sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as all countries. Okay, it's a good statement. We can take it. And what else we can do with China? And of course, we need to understand the biggest rivalry all the history of human being between China and the US. And I would say that it's also in Chinese interest to build this relationship with the US, but it's not going smooth. And I was really glad when Xi Jinping met with Joe Biden in San Francisco. It was a tiny step toward peace, but it's still, we need to talk. We need to talk with China. They need to talk with each other. And Ukraine needs to continue pushing China to sit at the same table for peace talk with us. So now Ukraine remains without trusty security guarantees. And if you remember, just a month ago or 2 months ago, the UK signed agreement on security cooperation with Ukraine. And it was only the first step. We need more agreements like that. And we need to build this security policy from zero. That's why Ukraine intensified the dialogue with NATO about membership action plan. And it needs a long period of time to reach this goal. But now China could be Ukrainian's nuclear umbrella. And I also said it many times. It was described in our bilateral joint declaration of 1994 and another joint declaration of establishment strategic partnership in 2011. Instead, China just adopts a vague stance and criticizes NATO and the West for adding fuel to the fire. But we need continue to find compromise, to find any solution. Another point, very important, I also mentioned in my article, global food security. It's still an issue. And the most discussed topic relating to the war in Ukraine. China was the greatest beneficiary of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, getting 8 million tons of commodities in 2023. We supply sunflower oil, barley, corn. Even we lost up to 40% of our trade turnover with China. China is still our largest trade partner. And we pushed China to play a more constructive role, to help us to continue the Black Sea Grain Initiative. But it didn't happen. And the initiative was terminated. So I was asked many times about the future of Ukrainian strategy of China, our relations with China now and after the war. We don't know, the war is not over, but future relations definitely will depend on Chinese behavior towards this war and China's close relations with Russia. I'm pretty sure China knows the red lines. And Xi Jinping refused to condemn the invasion and help Russia to save economy. But according to US and British intelligence, Chinese company, China do not supply weapons to Russia. And China try to control their companies, don't get around the sanctions because China don't like sanctions. We know that. And Chinese companies, also some of Chinese companies have already ended up on the sanctions list. But we need to talk. We need to push this control. And I'm pretty sure that China would do from official side, from official top level, for controlling their companies, not to sell to Russia, especially from after the Biden law against any kind of support and control by financial institutions. And we know some Chinese banks banned cooperation with Russian companies. As I said, the biggest concern for millions is still the US-China rivalry. And elections result in the US will also put everything, I think, reply a lot of questions. And we need more steps like meeting in San Francisco to avoid another disaster on the planet. More steps toward peace, not war.
Of course, Dr. Golod. Again, let's talk about, before we talk about the U.S., let me ask you one more question. Again, we know that when we look at the war in Ukraine, not only transformed the whole world, and of course, again, as we mentioned over and over again, that today, in the year of 2024, and no one would like to see another war, and no one would like to see more people suffering. Not only physically, but also mentally and spiritually. But let's talk about, from your perspective, how do you think the war has already transformed the life and the work of the Ukrainians today? Again, believe me, there are some what we called polarized media platforms and belief that Ukraine should cave, or Ukraine should be willing to negotiate with Russia at this moment, or even some of the big media company in the West are strongly believe that at this time there's no point to support Ukraine anymore because the domestic issues or domestic priorities. But meanwhile, I still believe that we need to understand the war has transformed the life and work of the Ukrainians, and we need to understand the reality, and also we need to show the reality to the world continuously. So what do you think of that?
I use every kind of platform to say that's not war in Ukraine, that's war in Europe. That's war it's a global war. Because if the world just abandoned Ukraine, it will continue in other countries. And we also know about big concern from Baltic sides, from Poland side. So we don't know what would be next. And people need to know about this war in Ukraine. This war has dramatically changed the lives of all Ukrainians. The war affected everything in our lives. It's a permanent stress. Even I'm not in Ukraine now. My husband, my parents, my colleagues are still there. My brother joined the Ukrainian armed forces a year ago, here in the south of Ukraine. And it's my big concern. Every morning I check the news. I give millions calls just to make sure that everything is all right. So it's a new reality. We still live in 24th or 2022. It's a bigger stress in everybody's life. And every day I tracked what's going on in Ukraine. It's devastating. And I'd like to say I was among those Ukrainians who didn't believe that war would happen in Europe in 21st century. I was sure we were protected by international law, but law doesn't work. In one moment, everything changed. I still remember that morning when the invasion started. That chaos on the streets, people fleeing to the western border. It was a sad picture. It is a sad picture of the real war lasting. It's been almost 2 years already. And I know a lot of stories of people of loss, fear, depression. So people need to know about all these stories. And I use every single platform to say that we need to do everything possible to avoid a new war. We need to talk more about peace, to work under all possible scenarios to preserve the peace, to avoid another war. Just believe me, I know what I mean.
Of course, Dr. Golod, we feel the sincerity and also the brevity for you to tell the truth. Now, 2 more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about this ongoing U.S. presidential election. Now, let's bring the elephant in the room into our conversation, which is Donald Trump. Now, if you, I don't know if you're very active on social media, hopefully not. I mean, because these days, when we follow social media, we can really drive ourselves crazy to the wall. Now, Donald Trump once said that if he were to be the president, he could actually end the war between Russia and Ukraine within 24 hours. And he's able to, or hopefully he's able to, bring Zelenskyy and also Vladimir Putin onto this negotiation table. Now, politically speaking, we call him bluff, or we call him that's full of hot air, or in reality, that could be something that we don't even know is going to happen. So you're the expert, Dr. Golod. Now, as a Ukrainian citizen, what do you think that if Donald Trump were to be the president, hypothetically, and his statement like he could end the war within 24 hours, and also he thinks that U.S. today should take care of this domestic issues first instead of continue sending aids to Ukraine, and also talk about that if the member of the NATO does not pay the bills, and the Russian should actually bomb, I want to be careful with the language, whatever they want. How do we make of such a political statement, or how do we make of such attitude? Is it just because this presidential election, or you think that Ukraine should actually work harder in order to continue this effort in win the war over Russia? What do you think?
I pretty believe that that's all election campaign, and we will continue to cooperate with any president, any government, any parliament here in the US. And also, we pretty believe that Trump also understands what's going on in Ukraine, and he knows Putin very well. That's why I still trust Ukrainian nation, because we don't have any other choice but fight and stand. But from other hand, we still have time till November. That's why we push American Senate, Congress to support us and to help us now that we need to do some progress on the battlefield. But we are ready to talk with any president of the United States.
Dr. Golod, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you a very simple question. again, based on your bio, that you co-founded of the Ukrainian platform for contemporary China. We know that this is rather significant, and of course, it's rather meaningful for us to understand Ukraine and China and even the whole world. Now, from your perspective as the co-founder, why is it important for you to set up or to co-found the Ukrainian platform for contemporary China? What is the message and what is the deeper meaning behind that? Your final thoughts.
We launched that platform for contemporary China to have the dialogue with international scholars, to find solutions on China, on Ukrainian-Chinese relations, of China-world relations with other colleagues from other institutions, from the US, Europe, Asia, and we launched it in May 2022. And we are doing a big effort to continue this work even during the war. So I'd like to take this opportunity and invite everybody to join Ukrainian platform for contemporary China on February 22nd. And it would be great discussion also on mediating role of China in 2023 and what could be new in 2024 for Ukraine, for China, for the world, for the EU-China relations as well. It's also important. So just join our platform on February 22nd, 3 p.m. Kyiv time. And Kaiser Go will moderate that event. So everybody, welcome to join.
This sounds very exciting, Dr. Golod. Again, as what we say, that it just because that today we're living in a very complicated world, and that doesn't mean that we should be isolated. And of course, today that we cannot afford to be isolated. And of course, I strongly encourage everyone to check out this amazing platform. It's Ukrainian platform for contemporary China. And also, of course, as Dr. Golod mentioned, the upcoming event should be very exciting. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite Dr. Vita Golod. Again, Dr. Golod obtained her PhD in economics. She's a junior research fellow of the Modern Studies Department, and she's the chair of the board of the Ukrainian Association of Sinologists. And most importantly, that she co-authored and also she published numerous articles regarding the ongoing war in Ukraine and also the relationship between China and Ukraine. Well, Dr. Golod, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show. And we surely love to participate for the upcoming event, and so that more people can find out and the unknown history and also, of course, the modernity of the relationship between China and Ukraine and the whole world. So thank you so much for doing this.